Very welcome to New Shape Forum, this broadcast. My name is Jens Horbach. I am the Executive Director of the Global Challenges Foundation. And I guess most of you know a little bit about us. We were founded 2012 by the philanthropist Laszlo Szombat-Falvy, who was a very successful risk taker on the financial market, but other risk creeped closer to him, and therefore he founded this foundation. I just read the participation list, and when I look at this meeting, I would see this as a rather informal one, a working meeting, where the outcome of this meeting is very much decided by your contribution. So I would like to just read out the names and make a special welcome to Marcelo, Giovanni, Mats, Christer, Milos, Hillary, Carl, Nigel, Christina, Theo, Maja, Francisco, Lisa, Paolo, Wendo, Richard, Joachim, Sylvia, Lisa, Diana, Margaret, Augusto, Johan, Pelle, Natalie, Gustav, Lauren, Arti, Jan, Valdemar, Lisa, Aronaba, Beatrice, Silke, Earl, James, Angela, Anna, Charles, Adriana, Arthur, Georgios, Mats, Angie, Karin, Joachim, Paula. And you are all over the globe. Special welcome to all of you. This New Shape Forum is the first out of two. There will be a bigger one, perhaps a little bit formal one in this fall, in October. But let's concentrate on this first one. So once again, very welcome. Life is fantastic and sometimes miserable. And it's the same thing, I think, about the world. It's going to be so, it has been so, but there are a few things that we can do. We can do something to mitigate global catastrophic risks. And you all know that this is the focus of Global Challenges Foundation. Risk that we have dealt with and we will deal with. And we like the institutions that are dealing with them. But to some extent, these institutions are getting irrelevant, at least if they are not able to handle climate changes, biological collapse, or a default of the regulation of weapons of mass destructions. And this meeting is very much here to give you our ideas out to you, but most of all to listen to your ideas. And if you have reflections on other ideas that is coming up on this meeting. GCF is heavily dependent on the cooperation. If we can be a catalyst, a facilitator, or a supporter in this area, we are more than happy, because your strength is our strength. Your ideas of solutions is the challenges, is there to face the challenges that we all face together. And in many places, in small and in big, if we have a common problem or challenge, we also need a common place to talk about them. That could be in the sports club, it could be among other condominiums, it could be in the road association, in the municipality, or in the parliament, or in the government where some of us has experiences, or it could be at the General Assembly of the UN, around the kitchen table, or at COPs 26 coming up. We need global governance where there are global issues that we all are facing. And almost all of you that are following this broadcast are in one way or another involved in different projects aiming to mitigate risks of great importance. Some of you have met in different meetings, some of you will meet in different meetings, and soon we will talk about some of those responsible for meetings that are coming up, and that are very important, of course. But during this broadcast, we will also like to raise some questions to colleagues that have been around with us until we started. And the first one I would like to just see what's up is Natalie Samarsinge. You're one of the first one up. Welcome, Natalie, and welcome back to the civil society. How are you?
I'm very well and very, very glad to be back and delighted to be at another New Shape Forum.
Thank you. You've been with us from the beginning. You were also one of the prize takers at our New Shape Prize. You have been now at the UN, not working intensely with UN 75 as a strategist, and now you are back at UN UK. How do you see the situation now? What is, for instance, Together First doing?
So Together First, I think we've really grown over the past year into a movement for global governance, innovation, and inclusion. Last year, we released a to-do list for the international community, really focusing on what are the steps that we can get right now, given the terrible political situation and, of course, the unexpected, although actually not unexpected by many, situation with the pandemic. What is it that we can do now that will be the most transformative? We were also able to shape some of the decision-making and framing at the UN on the declaration adopted by member states on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the UN. And now we're really looking at, what do these words mean? We have this, big agenda. We have huge issues. What are the steps that we can take immediately? And how can we raise ambition in the Secretary General's follow-up process? So we're working now on sort of a follow-up to our to-do list, which is looking at the big ideas. Where will these incremental steps that we've been pushing for, where can they lead to? And climate is the perfect example for that. So with COP, we were very pleased to be involved in the push around this pledge for net zero by 2050, but it's not enough. How can we bring together the climate and environmental agendas? That's another huge question for us. How can we ensure that the voices of the marginalized are heard? That is really core to why Together First was founded, to ensure that there are different voices in global governance discussions.
Natalie, I see you both as an activist in a way, but you now worked for a couple of years at the UN as there, and it's always good to have people that are both engaged and are professional, and how do you see yourself in this shift? Where can you do the most? And is there a frustration or is it hopes? I just want to know how you feel.
It's a great question. The working for the UN was very rewarding. A lot of it was as I expected. It's a great organization. They're dedicated colleagues. I learned a lot. But the bureaucracy, the silos, the hierarchical structure, the conservative with a small c, approach, the politics, they were all much more debilitating than I knew from the outside. I realized they would be there on the bigger issues, but to see them really affect day-to-day small things, hiring, how you hold meetings, how long someone speaks for. It just showed me how big the gap is still between the expectations that the public have, for of the UN, and that was very affirming. I worked on, the biggest global consultation that the UN has held in years. There is a huge demand for multilateral solutions. People believe in the UN, including people who the UN, we would probably say, has failed time and time again. People in Myanmar, people in Gaza, people in Sri Lanka, etc. They still believe in the rule of law. They believe in these mechanisms. But we are nowhere near, I think, at the UN being as flexible, as adaptable as we should be. Things like consultation, partnership, it still feels a bit scary to most people. It's not part of the UN's DNA in the way that it should be. So one of the changes we really pushed for, which seems very small, is this idea of having a civil society champion, just to help this culture shift and say, look, the UN is an important player, but it is only part of the puzzle, and we need to go much, much further in democratizing global governance.
Now the suggestion that came up to UN 75 is taken care of by the Secretary General. What hopes do you have here?
Well, I mean, the Secretary General has pledged to respond to what came out of the public consultation. Climate change was top in the issue, and this call for more inclusion and accountability. Then, of course, you have the member states track, this declaration I mentioned. You know, at first, member states were just going to focus on, I think they were probably going to just reaffirm the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, the idea was the future we want. Then along came COVID. We did some lobbying along with others, and the focus is much more on global governance itself. I think we have an opportunity now, in crisis as ever, to move forward. And there's a recognition that things need to change. Of course, many states have reacted to the crisis as they always do, shutters down, national interest first, but we're always going to have that. So I think we really need and want to see the Secretary General now do what the UN, I think does best, which is setting that vision, creating the space, empowering others, doing more on the convening side, and quite frankly, on the advocacy and campaigning side. That is the UN strength. And then looking at how can it fit in and bring together all the others who can move much quicker and more effectively in the spaces that we need.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It's good to have you on board here on this broadcast and also to work closer with you in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think those who have their eyes on the future and the hopes when it comes to climate changes and the way we deal with it are looking at COPs 26 that is coming up in Glasgow in November this year. And Nigel Topping, I hope he's with us. He is the UK's high-level action champion appointed by the UK Prime Minister. Now I can see you with us from London, I guess. How are you, Nigel?
I'm very good. I'm actually in Devon. The UK is not all in London. I'm in Devon.
Okay.
3 hours west of London.
Right. How is the planning going for COPs 26?
Well, first I should clarify, although I'm appointed by the UK government, I have this UN mandate for the role that was created in Paris to work with non-state actors around the world. So I'm not in the government team. I have my own team globally, but obviously work very closely with the UK team. Look, I think the planning is going very well in some ways and very challenging in other ways. I think it's going well in terms of mobilisation of more ambitious pledges from national governments and from non-state actors around the world. Of course, it's really complicated by the lack of ability to meet in person, so the negotiation processes have been very much hampered, and we're still very much hoping that the COP itself will be physical in person. Particularly the smaller and more vulnerable countries are very clear that they want it to be in person and that virtual negotiations won't work. So I think in terms of the momentum, good, and still, of course, a lot of uncertainty given the situation with COVID and vaccines all around the world.
You know, when you listen to the news or when you even meet people on the street, if they know anything about this, there are often very high expectations on this kind of meeting, that now we're going to solve these challenges that we have here. What are your expectations, and what do you say to these people that have these very high expectations that decisions are going to be taken at the COPs 26?
Well, I think first thing to say is it's worth being a bit of a student of what the COP is and what the COP isn't. The Conference of the Parties itself is not renegotiating the global climate deal. The global climate treaty was created in Paris, and what the parties, the national governments, are doing is negotiating some of the fine details of the Paris rule book. The reason this COP, of course, is so important is it's 5 COPs after Paris, and Paris created this 5-year, or 5 COP, this of course is 6 years now, cycle of ratcheted national ambition. So I think the role of the COP has shifted from being about negotiating the big deal to being the forcing moment when everybody has to step up and demonstrate that their ambition has raised and that we're moving much faster. And because interestingly, in the context of this conversation about governance, that is a multilateral process, but very much includes lots of parties or lots of non-state actors, as the Paris Agreement refers to them, who of course I'm working with. Their cities, states and regions, businesses, investors, civil society groups, all of whom are very mobilised in moving things forward and are needed, because this is a whole of society shift. So I think don't expect something that is not deliverable from the negotiations, because those are quite well defined, but do expect and put pressure on national governments and non-state actors to really be stepping up and demonstrating more ambition and faster momentum.
Right. I mean, you were recently the CEO for We Mean Business. It's a coalition of businesses working to accelerate the transition to a zero carbon economy, and you also have a long career in the private sector. How would you recommend the civil society to prepare for COP's 26, and what could be the most important contribution from them there?
Well, of course, civil society is a big word, and as I said, there are the members of civil society. So I work a lot with the businesses, investors, cities, states, and regions, because they have real political and economic ability to drive the transition. And then, of course, I think probably when you say civil society, you're meaning other civil society organisations, so NGOs, academia, etc. I think a couple of things in terms of preparing for the COP. First of all, make sure you understand what the COP is and isn't about, because if you have unachievable expectations from the negotiations, like that the negotiation is going to agree a global price of carbon of $200, or that it's going to renegotiate the goals or impose some penalties on some countries, then you'll be disappointed. So make sure you understand what is being negotiated and what isn't. And because of that, I think the most important thing for civil society is, of course, the role of holding national governments accountable for delivering on the promises they've already made. But that's mostly now a local thing, so UK civil society holding the UK government accountable, Philippine civil society holding the Philippines government accountable for the promises they've already made, and to make sure that they ratchet up. But of course, civil society can also encourage, put pressure on, hold accountable schools, universities, cities, businesses. Everybody is involved in a whole network of relationships in society. So I think what we're seeing right now is civil society driving for and holding accountable to much higher levels of ambition and demanding evidence that that ambition is being met by action. So really, as always, I think from civil society, it's about being very clear what bit of the complicated jigsaw puzzle you're focusing on, making sure you're specific enough, because we're in the period of countries, cities, businesses, and the international arena all having to be very specific. It's not time for just general, we need to do more. It's like, what year do we need to phase out combustion engines? How fast do we need to ramp up renewable energy? What policies does a city government need to put in place to ensure clean air for its citizens? So it's about, I think, knowing what is at stake, but then being very specific about what we engage in.
Right. The meeting is, I think, from the 1st to 12th of November. How will it be set up? Is it planned to be physical, or are you planning two alternatives?
Well, as I said, the UK government is determined that it will be a physical event, and the parties, the countries who ultimately decide, remember this is a multilateral process, are also determined it will be a physical event. So I'm very confident it will be a physical event. Of course, the negotiations is part of the process, and there are also many other observers from civil society. So the expectation is that it will be a fully physical event as normal, but of course we've all learned in the last 18 months just how much we can do virtually, and in particular how much we can reach many people who may not be able to travel. So for example, this morning I was in Australia, and this evening I'll be in Canada, but I'm actually staying in Devon the whole time. I think we'll see a lot more sort of hybrid events, so finding creative ways to engage with people all around the world who are not able to, or who choose not to travel.
And I think it's good for us to hear also that, I mean, the civil society can put pressure in their own country. Businesses can do a lot of things by showing a good example. But then when the civil society have great ideas on what others could do, how is the possibility to be present at the COPs 26 and to present your ideas or be part of it?
Well, first of all, remember the COP is a technical international negotiation between sovereign states.
Right.
So nobody other than sovereign states gets a seat at the table. Not businesses, not cities, so it doesn't matter if you're the governor of California with the 5th biggest economy in the world, or if you're the CEO of Amazon, you don't get a seat at that table. Or if you're civil society, that's a legal negotiation between countries. But the UN Climate Convention does provide for roles for formally recognised observer groups across the whole range, from young people to businesses to indigenous peoples and more. And they have a role in being present, holding events, observing, commenting on, but not actually having a seat at the negotiating table. So it's an important distinction, and that won't change, because that's a very formal structure, just as civil society doesn't have a seat at the UN General Assembly or at the Security Council, but does have a way of engaging, as Natalie was describing, many ways of engaging. So civil societies, of the 30 to 40,000 people who normally go to a COP, the majority will be actually from all of those observer communities, civil society, business, cities, faith groups, indigenous groups, etc. And so expectations that process and all those observer processes and all those side events will take place as normal, and as I say, I think be amplified globally through the technology that we're using today.
Stand by, Nigel, because I would like to invite 2 more persons into this conversation. Here with me is Johanna Lissinger-Pates, who is ambassador for Stockholm Plus 50. You are now connected to the Ministry of Environment, but I know you have a long background at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you have been in many high-level meetings. You were also leading the delegation for Sweden.
Yes, I used to be leading the UNFCCC delegation for Sweden from the last couple of years, and had also a role as an EU lead negotiator on climate finance, and I recognize a lot of the things that Nigel is talking about. Mm.
But we're going to question him hard as well. And I hope that we have Maria Fernanda Espinosa with us here. Hello. Yes, Maria, you are the former president of the United Nations General Assembly, where you were very open, I remember, to the civil society, not the least, and you are currently working also on different strategy to build back better from the COVID-19. May I first ask both of you, perhaps start with Maria, do you have any comments on what Nigel have said so far about expectations when it comes to COPs 26?
Oh, absolutely, Jens. I think that there are great expectations, and we are living what I call a very climate-friendly international geopolitics, and we have to really grab the opportunity and make the big economies deliver on their commitments. We saw with great hope the recent climate summit called by President Biden, and we saw the big emitters coming up with strong and bold mitigation commitments. So I think that there are great expectations for Glasgow. It is extremely important that we strengthen the public trust in the multilateral system, in the role of the UN, in international law, in the Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement. And we have the opportunity to do so. And we are doing this in a context where countries, especially in the global south, but I would say worldwide, are so worried about building back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. What we saw last year, unfortunately, is that in spite of the billions and trillions invested in the economic recovery, very little was going to low carbon investment in the 50 more important economies worldwide. So there is a lot to do. There is homework to do in Glasgow. I think that the negotiations are ongoing, but we are experiencing this climate-friendly geopolitical environment, and we should take full advantage of that, of course. And perhaps later we can discuss about climate finance expectations for Glasgow, which are more important than ever because of the challenges faced by the developing economies as they recover from the COVID pandemic. So thank you, Jens, again, and totally in agreement with what we heard from Natalie Samarsinghe before, and from Nigel also regarding importance of involvement of the private sector, of civil society, of non-state actors as key advisors, reference point for climate negotiations, which are mostly intergovernmental. So thank you, and back to you, Jens.
Yeah, and thank you, Maria. We will be back to you as well. May I just remind you that there is on your screen there is a space if you want to raise a question or two that we can bring up to our friends here in the studio. Do you have any comments on the expectations for COP26?
I think maybe many of us at the meeting are sharing the same expectations, but two reflections on hearing Nigel speaking. And I think the first one, just hearing him speaking also shows that the decision to have climate champions actually was a quite, at the time, bold decision, a very important decision, and just be that kind of connection between the governments, the formal UNFCCC process, and the civil society. I also, I think, recognize a lot of even his narrative of understanding what the COP is and what the COP is not, where I think the civil society has a crucial role of focusing on, maybe less on the COP agenda, which is negotiation between states, but focusing on what is connecting the global agenda and the local agenda, and making sure that there are actions that actually is delivering on the ground, and putting that pressure on governments in the context of the COPs to also take actions to actually fulfill and implement the decisions taken.
May I ask you, all three of you, because when listening to you, and also following what's happening, you can see one track is a little bit towards that we have a lack of, or a governance gap, that these institutions are not really there to handle environmental challenges or climate challenges. For instance, Natalie, when they made the big inquiry in the UN asking people what is the biggest security risk, they say, the people answered around the globe, it's climate change, or it's an environmental. But we have a Security Council that doesn't deal with these issues. So one part is, do we have a lack of institutions that could deal with them and put the focus on there? Or is it rather we have to live with these institutions, and we have to see what businesses, what civil society, what individual countries can do in their doing, in their promises? Or do we need both?
I think in the short version is we probably need both, but I think in many cases we do have the institutions. We have to work harder, however, to make also climate and environment a top priority for those institutions, and be able to put on the agenda for those. I think we are seeing in Security Council, it's progressing, it's starting to move up. I'm sure others can speak better of that. And I have to say that since Paris up to now, I think we have seen quite a big difference in the presence of climate in the institutions. If you look at the work of UNDP, for example, if you look at the banks also, I would say when you come to biodiversity or other environmental issues, we are still not there yet.
And what do you say here, Maria or Nigel? I try to paint out two different tracks.
Well, if I can just jump in, I would say two things. First of all, I think that I've been part of climate negotiations for the past 12 years or so, no, 15 years now. And basically, my experience has been that climate change is increasingly a part of the development discussions and the development agenda. If you discuss about migration and refugees, climate change is at the center. If you discuss poverty or gender equality, climate change takes an important part. So I think that there is a pan-presence, a main presence of climate change as a determinant for development and as a determinant for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But with that said, we should not forget that there are ongoing processes and new proposals on the table. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the UN 75 process that Natalie was referring to, has unleashed enormous amount of creativity, different proposals that are on the table, and an ongoing negotiation, which is extremely important, which is the Global Pact for the Environment. There is a mandate from the General Assembly for this negotiation. It is in progress, work in progress, and it's going to be, in my opinion, a very important umbrella basically to give coherence to the more than 400 existing environmental multilateral agreements, which of course climate is a key part, but biodiversity, oceans, desertification, in hundreds of more, the chemicals convention, et cetera, so there is this effort to put everything together and provide a framework looking at the Earth system as a holistic, interconnected whole. And we international law that is coherent, articulated, interconnected. And from civil society, we have seen a very interesting proposal on the table, which is the establishment of a Global Resilience Council, which will take care of the non-armed conflict related risks to human security. And this discussion is happening as we speak, a very intense, dynamic, and creative conversation about the possibilities, the true possibilities of creating this Global Resilience Council. So the discussions and the conversation is out there, very interesting. And from the multilateral perspective, again, the Global Pact for the Environment, which I think it's promising, it's interesting, and it is international environmental law in the making.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a comment here, Nigel, on do we also need the reformation of institutions like the Global Resilience Council, or can we use what we have today and just speed it up voluntarily?
Well, I mean, what I'd really like to talk about is that the Secretary General talks about the new multilateralism, which goes beyond just using existing international institutions, reforming them or adding to them like the Risk Council, but recognizing that the reality of the world system is that it's not monolithic in terms of Westphalian states and the United Nations institutions. They're crucial, but anything that assumes that all change will happen through those institutions will likely fail because it just doesn't meet the world where it is. This is what I think is really exciting about what's happening around climate change, as the biggest long-term crisis that we face that we can learn from. And you look at the sort of institutions that we have around the Climate Action Network, thousands of NGOs networked together. Fridays for the Future is an institution, millions of young people organizing. And We Mean Business that I used to run is an institution. The Global Commons Alliance, which has sprung up, which is Johan Rockström creating the Earth Council and then the Science-Based. So there's a whole lot of new institutions, C40 cities, mayors coming together, the Under 2 coalition. So I think this new multilateralism is a place for real innovation where some of the challenges of the kind of monolithic nature of the United Nations, which Natalie was referring to can be met with some more of the flexibility of a world of institutions, which sometimes is messy, but that's the way that I think we can. Some of that messiness actually allows us to move faster and then converge, not so much top down, but more, more the way that the analogy I use is the way that starlings or flock or that fish shoal, that we have convergent patterns of behavior because we align around ideas like planetary boundaries, science-based targets, net zero, and don't assume that all change comes monolithically top down, because I think that if we assume that, we'll continue to be disappointed. So I really like the Secretary General's idea of the new multilateralism. I think we are building it as we speak, but it's in very early days still.
And then and when we meet, or countries meet, in the General Assembly or at COPs 26 or maybe in Stockholm Plus 50, can you tell us a little bit about the thoughts and the background for a Stockholm Plus 50 meeting, Johanna?
Yeah, and I think I'll kind of pick up where Nigel actually ended. And besides the 50 years as such from Stockholm 1972, and we are of course always looking forward to having celebrations in Nairobi for a UNEP Plus 50 meeting. But I think the reasoning and the background for our government to take this initiative is both, and that comes in a way to what Natalie spoke about, is looking at breaking down the silos between different policy areas within environment, but also looking at the nexus environment and development, which Maria very much spoke about. And then the third is to build on, I think, what we have seen coming more and more on that network multilateralism, to work closely together with very strong agenda-setting agencies and institutions outside the UN system. Because I think, to me, it's always that interconnection between the UN system and those other institutions, agencies, and how there is a kind of relationship of pushing each other to perform better. And in a kind of decade of delivery, with the urgency that we know how to act, that kind of push and interaction is of high importance. So it's in that landscape, and of course in the landscape of COP26, of the HLPF, of the upcoming Kunming meeting, the 73.3 Global Pact for Environment declaration. That's where we are placing a Stockholm Plus 50 to make the connections between the dots and to pick up on the areas in between those, which are essential to drive implementation.
I can have a guess where it could be held, but when is it planned to be held?
It's planned to be held the first week of June in 2022. So I think we're looking at 1st to 2nd of June, and it's also the same day, same week as the World Environment Day, which was actually, in a sense, also an outcome of Stockholm, together with UNEP and the Stockholm Principles. So that's where and when.
Mm-hmm. And we heard a little bit about Nigel talking about the expectations and not having expectations, because you need to know what is going to be talked about around the tables there. What are your expectations or ambitions for Stockholm Plus 50?
Yeah, and first to start to say, I have to say that I kind of smiled when I heard Nigel talk about that, because I heard my own. We always had, huge press briefings ahead of the COPs, and that's exactly the kind of narrative you're trying to explain. You can always have expectation on what the COP is set to deliver on, but that was not the question. It's my old climate hat
right.
Jumping on. We have set a quite high expectation for ourselves in creating a Stockholm Plus 50 that contributes from different perspectives of redefining our relationship to nature. That fits very well, I think, into the Secretary General's agenda. It is building on also recent reports on making peace with nature. And when I speak about that, I most often get, I can't see the audience, but half of the audience is reacting with, wow, that sounds extremely right and very timely. And the other half is kind of reacting with, what does it mean?
I think it sounds poetic as well.
It may be some poetic, yeah.
But important at the same time.
But I would say that in short, it is looking at actions from all levels in society, looking at how we transform the way we produce and consume and use our resources, to create that different relationship to nature, to contribute to what I know the UK is working hard on and others also, to keeping the 1.5 alive. So that's the higher level of ambition. And to be maybe a bit more concrete, to try to break that down into looking at what actually creates change on the ground. How can we connect the global level and triggering change and catalyzing effects on the ground? So that's the high ambition. And then I think we will also, need to come to that path. This is still a meeting that is to be negotiated in New York. When we have set the mandates, we will also, come to that kind of discussion that Nigel is having. What is it that we, from this big ambition, can expect from the meeting to be delivered?
May I ask you, Maria, when looking into the climate challenges, you can look back in history and see who has actually created this, the fossil in space, and then you can see the developing world that need to build their prosperity in a fossil-free way when consuming and when producing. How can we finance or help that being what will happen? Because it's a responsibility from the Western world, I would say, but it also has to do with our future, of course. And you mentioned in the beginning the crucial task of climate finance.
Well, indeed, Jens, and I would like to echo Johanna when she was saying that we need to connect the global to the local, and the NDCs are the indicator to how good our countries are delivering in our mitigation commitments. And nationally determined contribution. Sorry about the climate jargon here. But this is the first challenge, how to ensure that our mitigation commitments can be, accountable, transparent, reported in a way that can be comparable to other efforts. And of course, in the climate discussions, it is very important, very different to talk about the situation of small island developing states, of landlocked countries, the middle-income countries which are facing, as we speak, tremendous hardship because of shrinking fiscal and policy space during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was sitting in Cancun when we established the Green Climate Fund, and we said at the time the commitment, I was a minister of cultural and natural heritage at the time, and we said $100 billion starting in 2020 per year on climate finance. It hasn't happened yet. So I think this is one of the challenges, to be serious about climate finance, to bring in also the private sector. We are told that smart investment in resilient infrastructure, investment in a proper energy ecological transition is possible. And you ask about fossil fuels and about coal. This is still an unresolved issue for some countries. And let me share about my own country, Ecuador. Half of our income comes from oil exports. And so we really need to come to grips and see how this road to net zero emissions by 2050 is going to happen. The big economies have already committed. The European Union, China has made a commitment for 2060. The United States. So I think that the pieces are bringing together, but still for the developing countries, I think we have a debt, and the debt is to come together with strong, decisive finance. And it's not only about the 100 billion per year after 2020, but also about low carbon technology transfer, about capacity building for developing countries. And a pending homework for the coming COP would be to close Article 6 of the Paris rulebook, which is the roadmap for implementation of the Paris Agreement. We haven't yet reached an agreement on the role of markets in carbon mitigation. And perhaps just a last word on the need to connect mitigation, to reduce emissions, but at the same time, adaptation and resilience building. This is critical, especially for the countries that suffer the most of the effects of climate change, which are small island developing states, for example, or landlocked countries, or the least developed countries, for that matter. So there are, it's a great homework ahead of us, and I have to say that something that brings a lot of light and enthusiasm beyond the next COP in Glasgow is the Stockholm Plus 50. I'm so happy that Johanna and in Sweden, they're hands-on, because it is going to be this peak moment to recommit to the Rio principles, to the Stockholm history of 50 years, to reconcile with nature. I really like that expression from the Secretary General, and to make peace and reconcile with nature. It's going to be a critical moment. We're going to have the Conference of the Parties on biodiversity, on desertification, the Big Oceans Conference. So there is international momentum to make peace and reconcile with nature. And that, of course, is going to require profound systemic changes, even in the structure and the delivery capacity of the United Nations itself. Sorry, I got so enthusiastic, and back to you, Jens.
Yeah, thank you very much. I received a couple of questions here, and these questions are items that we're going to speak of later on, but I want to highlight them now when I have this great panel around me, and that is your thoughts about alliance of the willings, or clubs for tariffs, or club for CO2 emissions. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, Nigel?
Well, actually, I think this is part of the new multilateralism that the Secretary General talks about. We have things like the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is countries, cities, businesses who've all committed to phasing out coal, and we see the same similar things. The new initiative was just launched recently called LEAF, which is again governments and businesses investing in forest communities. So I think there's a really important role for clubs of the leaders, as long as they stay open to others joining them, I think, and don't become closed. I think part of this sort of new multilateral architecture, it's really important that those kind of leadership clubs welcome and are designed to scale up, not to keep people out.
I mean, if they are attractive, it could be some sort of soft power that entice members to apply for membership. Do you have any comment on that, Johanna?
I do, and I think it's this last sentence from Nigel is quite important, because those common leadership alliance or group of the willings, they are very much pushing the agenda. But in a sense, to me, the most interesting question is, well, those often reflect very high ambition. What is required, and how can maybe that group of willing help those who would like to be in that club, but yet not have the actually abilities to make the policy changes, to adapt, to be in that club? So if you can have that group who leads the development, but then also within that and together with others have the discussion on how do we help each other to actually reach that goal together. Is my addition.
I have a question here about the Security Council that is now paralyzed vis-a-vis the Middle East, but and its mandate is actually with armed conflicts and not climate issues. And you were into that a little bit. do you see a need for some sort of other governance council or something that also can deal with environment in a more, I would say, practical way at the UN level, Maria?
Well, I just mentioned, Jens, this idea that is being discussed on the establishment of a Global Resilience Council. And I have read the proposal that comes from FOGS, the Foundation on Global Governance, and I think it's extremely interesting. And in terms of, I think that this proposal needs to be tested with member states, because at the end of the day, the decisions have to come from member states in an intergovernmental negotiation. And I find it quite interesting, and it is not only on climate, it is on global health and pandemics, everything that puts under threat human security. And sometimes one thinks, I've been ambassador in Geneva, New York, sat in many open discussions of the Security Council, and you start wondering if perhaps Security Council should not concentrate more on armed conflict related threats to security, to look at focus on the peacekeeping missions, focus on the preventive approach to security and peace building, and to establish something, under the authority of the General Assembly to address the many other challenges to human security. Whether it be natural disasters, global health threats, climate change, massive displacement and migration, et cetera, but I think it's an interesting opening and possibility, and to look, because for this September there are also great expectations on the report that the General Assembly requested to the Secretary General, called Our Common Agenda. And there is a global consultation happening as we speak. There is a virtual survey that is out there. Perhaps we can share the link that has been put together by the Office of the Secretary General. There are consultations ongoing with member states, consultations with civil society partners, to come up with creative ideas on how, and what should be this our common agenda template. And of course, that needs more involvement and commitment from member states. And I truly believe, independently of the form, I truly believe that we need a new pact for multilateralism, and simply to reassert and recommit to the principles of the Charter. And when we see things happening, you mentioned the situation of the very sad situation, tense, horrific situation in the Middle East, but you also saw that there were so many governance challenges when dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, so many shortages. Our multilateral system didn't quite work as well as expected. And I'm precisely looking at that as a member of the Lancet Commission on COVID. We're looking at the governance challenges and potential alternatives. So I think that there is appetite, interest, momentum to think out of the box and creatively about how to deal with the main human security challenges that we face, including climate, of course.
Right. One thing that usually is in the box when it comes to disputes is bringing people, companies, countries to court. And just the last question that came in here, to what extent can we see that we can change through law? There is a young generation now bringing states to the court. I think there are thousands of different law cases around climate and environment around the globe. How do you, Johanna, look at this possible way of solving conflict of interests, or severe crimes against nature?
It's a big question.
Yes, you have it. You have 45 seconds.
Good. Well, I think we see quite more interesting cases. We had a case in Germany just 14 days ago. But I would actually bring it down to maybe a nitty-gritty issue, because in many of the conventions and many of the agreements we have a compliance mechanism. In some cases, in conventions that are over 10, 15 years old, we are still not agreeing on establishing those compliance mechanisms. And in some cases where we have the compliance mechanism, there are still much to be done to get them to work. So my this is a very narrow answer to a huge question, but it somehow comes back to the issue that we have for ourselves established quite important mechanism, and we need to also take the responsibility as governments to make sure that they are actually working and delivering.
Thank you very much for that, because it's a good appetizer for a breakout session we're going to have later on concerning rule of law when it comes to dealing with climate issues. With this, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel from Devan, and thank you, Maria, and thank you, Joanna. Thank you very much. And now it's time for us to meet another, he's not very old, but an old friend that has been with the GCF from the beginning. And I hope that I have Richard Ponty with me from Washington, D.C. Yeah, I can see you. I think it's early morning, but you look awake. How are you, Richard?
Good, thanks, Jens. It's great to be participating in my first virtual New Shape Forum.
Oh, that's very good to know. Well, can you just tell us a little bit what's going on with the Stimson Center? We work together with the different global discussions, not the least up to UN 75, but you have taken on the process and continue there. So can you just update us a little bit about your job, your work?
Thank you. Yes, no, it's great to have a chance to talk about ways to continue our collaboration together with the New Shape community. The last couple of months, along with Global Challenges Foundation, but also we heard from Natalie earlier today from Together First, the Coalition for the UN We Need, and other partners, we've just concluded a 6-part series, which is feeding into this conversation, the post-UN 75 discussion, ways to take forward these 12 commitments of the UN 75 declaration. We put forward ideas, our colleague in our community, Dr. Adriana Abdenor, her call for a global forestry convention to protect forests. Along with Adriana, other members of the community that organized this series, I wanted to mention one other key activity that's coming up just in the next few weeks at the annual meeting of the Academic Council on the UN System, ACANS as it's known, along with Adriana's CIPO, Plataforma CIPO, based in, it's an international NGO think tank, but headquartered in Rio de Janeiro, and Professor Joris Larik from Leiden University, Stimson Center, my colleagues in Washington, D.C., and of course, ACANS, we're organizing what's called, kicking off the Global Governance Innovation Network. And it will be aiming to bring together world-class scholarship with international policymaking to address global governance challenges, threats, and opportunities. We're going to be working along 3 main tracks of activity, global and regional policy dialogues, like the ones that many of you in this community are participating in since 2018 with us, leading up to the UN 75 Global Governance Forum that Jens mentioned. We'll have an online community of practice, e-discussions, but also a chance for peer review of working papers that many of you might be undertaking. And finally, research, of course, commissioning policy briefs, especially rising young stars in the world of global governance studies, Global South, Global North, detailed studies. And if there's interest, Jens, I'd love to say a few words about a study that we're bringing out on Charter Day next year in this regard. Next month.
Yeah, but do that, Richard. I saw you were a senior advisor, but you have become some sort of boss there now at the Stimson Center, or you're making a career.
We just changed the name of our Just Security 2020 program. The name was becoming a little dated. So we're now the Global Governance, Justice, and Security Program. But our main activity, it's a partnership building activity, really coming off the innovation network track of the UN 75 Global Governance Forum. That is the GGIN, the Global Governance Innovation Network. To say a quick word about this research, because it's really going to be the emphasis of our contribution to this network and to hopefully the follow-on to the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. Our research looks at the Secretary General's concepts that we've been hearing about in his speeches for some time, but we expect to be featured in the Our Common Agenda report. That's his new social contract vision, you could say a vision statement. Then there's more operational ideas around a new global deal, as he calls it. And finally, he looks at more of the framework and approach to global governance, what he calls networked and inclusive global governance. And it's on that last point that we are advocating for a World Summit on Inclusive Global Governance in 2023, a intergovernmental and certainly multi-stakeholder vehicle to take forward the ideas both in the Secretary General's report, but through communities like the New Shape Forum, the ideas that we've been generating for years together. It's critical that there be some kind of follow-on process. Otherwise, we might be running out of steam coming off this very important follow-on report to UN 75.
And Richard, you've been in this field for a long time, and I know you have a high energy and you are devoted. What are your hopes for the near future if you look into COP's 26? Because now Nigel is not with us anymore, so you can have higher expectations. So what are your expectations when it comes to global governance dealing with not the least climate issues?
Alongside the global governance innovation agenda that's working across the whole set of issues, the three pillars, been talking about climate security linkages, the role of the Security Council, there's human rights, but it is the issues in the second basket, sustainable development, climate action, which I believe are at the heart of what the international community's focus needs to be. There's always been the decade of action that we were working on together for implementing the SDGs, but it's really the linkages to both the continued immediate real world needs of the COVID crisis, vaccines, the rollout, because without that, economies can't get going. But it's not just about re-energizing economies. It is green recovery, a durable, broad-based green recovery is, I think, the most critical agenda. That's, of course, delivering on the Paris Agreement, ratcheting up our ambition, and knowing that we failed at this 10 years ago, coming off the last major financial calamity in the world, the 2008-9 financial crisis, where it's noted that only 1 out of 6 stimulus dollars going into infrastructure-related investments could be called green-friendly, investing in renewables, green energy grids. Now we can correct that mistake in light of our commitments to Paris, US rejoining, all kinds of countries and regions. The EU has a Green New Deal. This is absolutely where the focus needs to be, and frankly, where the UN needs to show that it can not only deliver, but lead and harness the capabilities of its 193 member states, but a whole range of private sector, civil society, subnational, down to the community level actors. This is where the game needs to be focused.
May I ask you finally, Richard, we have got a lot of reports, of course, about the new administration now being a part of the Paris agenda again. What has been the domestic reactions in the US, if you should be a neutral reporter?
In terms of the big lead up to COP26 that we, of course, had in recent days, the U.S., which I think played a key role, the civil society, in kicking off Earth Day back in 1970. And in connection with Earth Day, John Kerry, our new special envoy on climate change, played a big role in 2015 in the adoption of the Paris Agreement. He, in his new role with the Biden administration, worked with President Biden to convene, I think it was about 40 countries, far majority of the world's major emitters, got China to the table, India, of course. And while, it was more about the U.S. re-engaging issues where it had been a leader prior to the past 4 years, as we know, the U.S. pulling out of the climate agreement. So I think there's a lot of excitement in the U.S. In particular, it's hitting a broader cross-section of the population than ever before, because the Biden administration is very skillfully linking it to jobs and the recovery that I noted, because everybody's concern has been a complete plummeting employment levels and of course the fragility, all linked to the COVID crisis of the last 12 months. We need to link these issues, and in a very real domestic context, I think people are seeing that the jobs of the future are green energy related jobs, and it's quite a positive dynamic that it's no longer seen as some left or fringe issue anymore. The sustainability issues are the future economic issues for countries like the United States.
Thank you very much, Richard Ponty. It was nice to see you again, and have a good day back in the US, in Washington, D.C. We are going to take a break, 10 minutes break, and I look forward to see you here again at 3:15, and I think it's going to be up on the screen as well. So that's Central European time. We're going to see each other here in 10 minutes. Hi again, and I hope you had the some time to maybe take a morning coffee or an evening tea, depending on where and what time zone you are in today. We are now just going to listen to a few colleagues and partners and listen to what they see as crucial when it comes to filling the governance gap.
The grand global governance challenge is to establish collective rules for all nations and actors in the world for how to govern the global commons within planetary boundaries. This translates to setting hard sustainability targets for all planetary boundaries to guide cities, nations, companies, and communities in all their activities. The second governance gap falls right from this grand challenge, setting science-based targets and translating them to policies that will take us there. All countries in the world need to cut greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030. The EU and the US has set this target. The governance challenge is that we now need concrete measures of how to get us there. And this includes pricing emissions, not only in the power sector, but also for transport, heating, buildings, and consumer goods. For a safe landing for world development, meeting zero targets for climate is not enough. We also need the world to reach global targets for nature, zero loss of nature. This can only be operationalized by halting deforestation and adoption of agricultural policies for healthy and sustainable food.
We need an effective way to hold countries accountable on climate action and support. And this is difficult at the moment, given the data gaps we face. Now, existing data on climate finance, for example, is confusing to understand, and it's likely to get even more so as funds flow in for development, for recovery, and as we even address this COVID-19 shock and the global economic recovery. Getting this right could be revolutionary, ensuring that all countries are able to put sustainability at the heart of economic recovery will depend upon full delivery of climate finance pledges, and we have got to be able to track them.
The example of a governance gap I wish to highlight is the gap of imagination. we're used to thinking of the future and how we can shape the future at the local level or even a national level, but we're not used to thinking globally and thinking of developing together a global vision. But that's what we need to learn to do now, because that's the only way for us to develop towards a much more resilient and arrive at net zero economy. And that is a challenge for global governance. And global governance arrangements and institutions need to help us all think globally, but in very concrete and practical terms. And this is why bridging from the global to the local and from the local to the global is a major challenge for global governance.
Interesting to hear about the risk gaps that we have to fill. And we will talk a little bit about that, because that is also the reason why the GCF have started this Climate Governance Commission. And here beside me, I have Linda Burenius, who is our head of development here at GCF, with a long background in the renewable business sector. And I hope I have Maya Groff with me, who is an international lawyer based in Hague with a long experience in multilateral treaties and various criminal tribunal, and together with Magnus Giborn was very crucial in the start of this commission. May I just first ask Linda, you listened to this broadcast for an hour. What has come to your mind?
Oh, many things. It was really interesting to follow the discussion, and personally, I believe I will reflect more on the new multilateralism that both Nigel and others mentioned, and also what role non-state actors can take in the climate challenge.
And Maya, do you have any comments, being an international lawyer?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, Jens. Hi, Linda. It was extremely interesting listening to the guests and the wonderful interviewing you did, Jens. And I was really happy to hear actually a lot of overlaps and synergies with some of what we're working on at the Climate Governance Commission. So that's extremely positive, I would say.
Okay, and I would like us to hear a little bit about this Climate Governance Commission, and I think that the best way is to let you start and explain what is it, what's the aim of the Commission, Maya?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Climate Governance Commission is really at origin one of the number of initiatives that came out of the Global Challenges Foundation New Shape Prize process and the New Shape Forum in 2018, related to conversations we had with Richard, for example, and others, and Natalie, who were there, about how we could possibly systematize and push forward policymaking at the global level to establish much more adequate international decision-making, for the better management of the range of global risks. That is really for a refreshed approach to global governance that is much more effective and reliable for the benefit of the whole international community. And so it was very nice also to hear Maria Fernandez-Espinosa earlier this afternoon talking about sort of a little bit more thinking outside the box and maybe some creative opportunities that are opening. And so climate change, of course, or global heating is a key, really urgent challenge for the international community when you look at effects on current populations, given accelerating effects, but also, of course, future generations. And we know we have a very narrow window for the needed action to meet the crucial Paris Agreement targets and the more ambitious targets, which we know are really necessary to avoid unreasonable levels of risk. And because of this challenge and other converging international challenges and risks that the global challenges thinks about, some scholars have noted this point in human history, this era, as something that could be labeled the precipice, that it's really necessary that we collectively, as an international community, think about and reflect much more deeply how we manage our shared global risks. So the Commission, within the context of the Global Challenges Foundation's mandate, really hopes to reflect on these broader issues and to then also develop very concrete proposals in relation to the global governance gap connected to climate risk, based on what the scientific community is telling us. We heard from Johan Rockström just now, and really what the planetary climate system and the planetary boundaries are telling us we should really manage. So just very briefly, some examples. The Commission is currently exploring existing bottom-up international coalitions and alliances for climate action, this new multilateralism that Nigel Topping was referring to, how these coalitions might be strengthened. And we heard from Joanna, the Stockholm Plus 50 ambassador. She was exactly saying, how do we get these leadership alliances and make sure they're scaled up and there's universal membership? We're exploring links between international trade and climate, how new technology and global policy can be diffused at the international level, accelerated given existing structures. But also, we're thinking a little bit more ambitiously. How can we have and start to think about a slightly more ambitious governance suggestions for new institutions that may have been around for many years, for example, proposals for a consolidated global environment agency, or as was mentioned a few times already, the creation of this Global Resilience Council proposed by FOGS as an interesting idea. And just to conclude, we're very fortunate to have a diverse group of experts contributing to the Commission. You saw a few of them in the video clips, but we've sought regional balance, gender balance, generational balance, and diversity and expertise also. And it's quite interesting to see the convergences in perspectives. For example, we have an Indigenous perspective in the Commission talking about, making peace with nature, the community relationships with nature. We have to really examine and explore this human dimension of cultivating global solidarity that we need to really tackle the climate challenge. And this is dovetailed with, for example, Haldor, you saw about thinking creatively and this human dimension to really build international solidarity to confront the climate challenge and to think in the near term, the medium term, and to think slightly more ambitiously also. So I'll end there as an overview introduction.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maya, and I will come back to you when you should guide us into the breakout sessions that are going to bring up some of the issues that you mentioned here. Linda, you work in that commission by identifying gaps on different levels. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, in the Climate Governance Commission, we are looking at the climate action gap at 3 different levels. So the first climate action gap is that the technological solutions to solve the climate crisis already exist but are not implemented in the scale and pace needed. Here we have a collaboration with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. They have identified 36 already existing technological solutions that could lead to that we could be aligned with the 1.5 degrees target. So, for example, it's massive amount of renewables, material efficiency, circular business models, plant-based diets, etc. And in the Climate Governance Commission, we have done a study where we have done a series of interviews with progressive business leaders to ask them what they see as the biggest obstacles to why can't they just implement those technological solutions. And of course here obstacles are often price related. It's still too cheap with fossil-based solutions. Risk is one very important obstacle as well. So that leads us to the second climate action gap, the policy implementation gap. Policies that could support the implementation of these exponential technologies also exist, but are not implemented in the pace and scale needed. And important policies is, of course, price and carbon risk mitigation mechanisms, removal of fossil subsidies, and so on. And here we are now exploring if we can use the term exponential policies. With that, we mean policies that could promote the implementation of the exponential technological solutions, but also policies that in themselves could be scaled up and diffused globally. So that will be one focus for today's discussion in the breakout sessions. And then the other focus would be identifying the governance gaps. And that is the third climate action gap that we're working with, where we lack governance mechanisms that could promote the implementation of the needed policies. And as Maya just said, we are working here with bottom-up pathways like climate clubs and so on, but also new reformed institutions, strengthened international law and so on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Very well explained, both of you, I think. And now we're going to go out to 3 breakout sessions. And can you guide us into them? Who will start?
Shall I start, Maya, with
Group 1?
Financial and trade governance? So Group 1 is financial and trade governance for a transition to a fossil-free economy. That would be a really, really interesting group, I would say. We will have an introduction from Angela Chyri-Kalhaug, who is the head of the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, who will introduce us to carbon pricing. And we'll also have an introduction from Professor Joachim Monkelbaum, who is an adjunct professor in sustainability and governance at International University at Geneva. And he will introduce us to the link between how climate goals better can be integrated in trade rules.
Mm-hmm. That's the first breakout session, and then we have 2 more. Maya.
Yes, indeed. So the second breakout group will explore the policies needed, global governance gaps in relation to ensuring a global just transition, including adequate investment into adaptation, very crucially for many countries, populations around the world. And this session will include introductions from Arunabha Ghosh, the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, based in New Delhi. From an emerging market and developing nation perspective, he has been doing very interesting research on global innovation platforms linked to getting finance, adequate finance to emerging markets, and also green jobs creation in the global south. And secondly, our second speaker for that session is Augusto Lopez Claros, an international economist and chair of the Global Governance Forum. And he'll be giving some insights on new perspectives, approaches on raising the required global public finance for a just transition. So that should also be a very interesting session. And third session is on accountability through strong international rule of law and governance gaps. In that respect, as you had mentioned earlier, Jens, and others, these very interesting high-profile recent cases at the national level brought by youth, where youth and other citizens are trying to hold their governments accountable for their international obligations, and they're having a tough time in general doing this. So we'll have an introduction for this session by Dr. Sylvia Carlson-Vinkhausen of the Public Administration and Policy Group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And we'll be taking political science and an international law approach and any other approaches people wish to contribute to think about really diagnosing the current lack of accountability in the sphere of international obligations relating to climate and environment.
Very good. So it's just for you to pick. So thank you very much, Maya. And thank you very much, Linda. So now there is 3 breakout sessions. And in these breakout sessions, you will have a facilitator that will take care of you. But it is a little bit, you have to find your way there. And you got an email from Sophia, from us. So now we are leaving the broadcast and going into a Zoom room, and you have that link on the email from Sophia. If you have any trouble, we will put up a screen here where you can ask questions. But in a few minutes, you will meet a facilitator in your breakout session, the one you chose. And I look forward to see you here at, shall we say, 4:30 Central European Time. Thank you so much for now, and have a good and interesting dialogue in the breakout session.